In this video we go looking for a kingfisher, a rare gull, loads of different finches and waders, and I try and settle a score with my friend the Surf Scoter. This week's birding started off on a wet and windy morning in North Wales. Hey folks, I hope you can hear me because it's very windy. I'm in Prestatyn looking for a kingfisher. It's a little pool by the road. It apparently frequents here, so I thought this would be a good bet. The only problem is the weather is terrible. It's raining, it's really windy, but let's see. The reason I'd come to this small roadside pool in Prestatyn was because I'd seen online some lovely kingfisher photographs taken at this location. And with this being such a small pool, if the kingfisher was here, in theory it shouldn't be too difficult to find. Unless of course it was hunkering deep in the tree cover to hide from the wind and miserable rain. And it turns out I was half right. I found the kingfisher at one end of the pool hiding in a corner. And it seemed to have found a reasonably sheltered spot. And as it seemed pretty settled, I was able to get lovely views. Unfortunately, last year we really struggled to get footage of this species, as often all we saw is a flash of blue as one flew past, so seeing one sat still was welcome. This robin-sized species has quite a wide range, living all across Europe, the Middle East, North Africa and much of Asia. And despite the horrible weather and getting soaked, it was an absolute privilege as always to see one of these wonderfully colourful little birds. Unbelievably, the kingfisher is behind me, just trying to shelter from the wind. And that's what I'm going to do soon. I'm going to head back on the road and move on to something else. So stick with me. Just as I was about to leave, the kingfisher decided to do the same. It flew off of its branch and disappeared out of sight. Perhaps it was also looking for a more sheltered spot. Now I moved on as I had a score to settle. Hi folks, I've come from the Kingfisher in Prestatyn now to Clwyd Bay. I'm looking again for the Surf Scoter. The only issue being now is the weather is terrible and the visibility is equally as bad. So I'm not holding out an enormous amount of hope, but I'm going to go out in the rain and give it a bit of a try. So stick with me, cross your fingers. When I arrived at the small fisherman's pier, not surprisingly, there wasn't anyone there mad enough to be out in this stupid weather. And as far as I was concerned, this was a fool's errand. Although, when I did look out to sea, I was pleasantly surprised by some close groups of common scoter. This was rather encouraging, until I looked further and discovered not all the scoters were close in. There were hundreds of them, far in the distance as far as the eye could see. And with a layer of fog over the water, the chance of IDing anything further out was going to be almost impossible. So I kept my sights on the flocks that were closer to the shore, and there were a few. And although I was getting particularly cold and very damp, I almost forgot about it, being blown away by some of the views I was getting of these common scoters. This is probably the closest I've ever seen this species, and they were joined by great crested grebes too, feeding near the shore. I almost forgot about the Surf Scoter. After about 45 minutes, the cold got the better of me and I warmed up in the car and had a chat with Kaylee on the phone. Now determined not to be beaten, I went back out into the wind and rain for round 2. But determined as I was and try as I might, again, today wasn't my day for this species. Hey folks, back in the car. It's freezing and wet and horrible out there. I've scanned the sea for well over an hour looking for this Surf Scoter. I can't find it. And I was in two minds whether to even put this bit in the video at all. But it's part of birding. Coming out, getting cold, not seeing the birds that you're after. And also I've got some lovely footage of common scoters closer than I usually see them. So that's excellent anyway. I'm going to move just a little bit up the coast to Llandulus just in case the Surf Scoters have moved down there. When I arrived 5 minutes down the coast at Llandulus shore, The story was much the same, just more flocks of common scouters. It was about this time I'd noticed on my phone a report of a bird sighting about an hour away, and a species I really wanted to see.
Hey folks, I'm here in Widnes. I've just driven an hour really quickly because someone's reported a Cumleen's Iceland gull here, which I've been to try and see a couple of times this year and failed. So fingers crossed today's the day.
Yes, I did say recycling centre, but although this is a busy and rather smelly place, it's a mecca for gulls, with many species visiting here, including some rarities like Iceland and glaucous gull. Over the last couple of years, the Cumleen subspecies of the Iceland gull has spent its winter here. We saw it last year, and apparently it had returned. And as I got out the car, I was met by a couple of friendly birders who pointed the gull out to me straight away. This amazing gull was sat on the roof of the recycling centre, preening, surrounded by hundreds of other species of gulls. And apparently, according to the other birders present, it had been showing on and off for about an hour or so.
Hey folks, we're here at Widnes with Lee and Ashley, who are subscribers. Thanks guys. They were here when I arrived, and luckily they had eyes on the Cumleen's gull, which has since taken off, so we kind of need to re-find it. That's another one for the year list. Excellent.
I chatted to Lee and Ashley for a while, as it's always great to meet our subscribers and other people in the birding community, but now it was time to try and re-find the Cumleen's gull, and it seemed to be a task. It had disappeared. There were plenty of other gulls here though, and it was amazing to scan through all the different shapes and sizes of just herring gulls. There is an amazing amount of variation just in this species. I did pick up lesser blackback gull for the year too. There was a few of this species here. By this time, Lee and Ashley had gone and another birder had arrived, and I re-found the Cumleen's gull, sat right on the end of the roof on the edge. And being unobscured this time by other gulls, we were able to see the wonderful white-tipped wings on this species. This individual is a third winter bird, and next year it'll be a full adult, and should lose the light brown mottling on the head and neck. As I mentioned before, the Cumleen's gull is a subspecies of the Iceland gull, which ironically doesn't breed in Iceland, instead breeding in Greenland and Canada, and wintering in Iceland, sometimes reaching the British Isles, with this individual wintering at this site for the last few years. And although I hadn't mentioned it in previous videos, I had visited the site a few times this year and failed to find it, so seeing it this well this time was amazing. What a neat gull, and I'm hoping it keeps on returning each winter. I watched it for a short while and then it took off with the other gulls, and unfortunately I couldn't re-find it again. Regardless, I was super happy with the views I had got. It was now time to leave, as I had somewhere I wanted to be.
Hey folks, well that was a pretty serious success with the gull. I'm at Hoylake now. I've come here for high tide to try and get some wading birds off our year list, including hopefully a little stint that's been reported here over the last few days, although not today, so fingers crossed we can find it.
Hoylake is on the tip of the Wirral, a piece of land that juts out between the Dee and the Mersey estuary, and great for waders at high tide, with thousands moving up the shore as the tide comes in. My challenge was to pick out a sparrow-sized wading bird amongst thousands of others, and thousands there were. There were a few species here present, some sticking together and some mingling with others, like this group of oyster catchers that was interspersed with a few not. There were a lot of this species here, but mostly in a large group in the far distance. The bird that was most numerous near me was dunlin. There were huge amounts of them. Another species which seemed to be hanging around with the dunlin somewhat was sanderling, which were lovely to see. But I was here for the much smaller little stint, and finding it seemed almost impossible, with these large groups of waders being very mobile. As I was scanning through them, the flock would take to the skies and relocate, and the task would have to begin again. Fortunately, I found two other birders that were scanning the beach, and after a short while, one of them somehow, by some kind of magic or sorcery, managed to find the little stint. It was feeding amongst a group of dunlin. This tiny little wader isn't a British breeder, but generally shows up on our shores during migration. They breed high in the Arctic tundra in Scandinavia and Siberia, migrating then generally to southern Europe, Africa and Asia, with the odd one overwintering here in Britain. We watched this individual feed for a while until he got lost in the ever-moving flocks of waders. Here at Hoylake and the Wirral in general is great for wading birds at high tide, and seeing the little stint here today was an excellent end to an eventful day's birding.
Success! There were a couple of other birders here, and one of them was very eagle-eyed and spotted the little stint amongst some dunlin and redshank, which is super. So that's not a bad day really, apart from the no-show from the Surf Scoter again. But I'm determined to go back and get that before it disappears.
The following day we had a couple of hours and my partner in crime was back with me.
Hey folks, she's with me this time, after the rest of the video just being me. We're at Clwyd, trying to get some finch species for our year list and hopefully brambling. Apparently there's willow tits here as well, but finding them might be tricky. Let's stick with us, let's see if we find any of them.
Although Clwyd's pretty famous in North Wales for their breeding ospreys, this place is great for wintering finches. And by the cafe they've got a bird feeding station which is regularly filled up. So plenty of hungry customers on a cold day. So this was our first port of call. When we arrived there were a couple of other birders and we took position, waiting hopefully for more species for our year list. Fortunately for us, the feeders were very lively with birds, with coal tits and siskins, chaffinches and goldfinches, all coming down for the peanuts and seeds. And with plenty of the seeds ending up on the floor, this is where a lot of the finches were feeding. After a short while of getting great views of all these other species, we spotted one of our target species in the back of one of the bushes. It's the brambling. This species is a little shyer than some of the other finches, so we made sure to keep far enough back and quiet, hoping that this brambling would be brave enough to come and feed on the floor in front of us. Unfortunately though, I took my eyes off it for a moment and it vanished. But after a short wait, hoping for the brambling to be brave enough to come and feed amongst the other finches, it did. But not for long. It must have only been down on the floor feeding for about 10 seconds, and then was spooked and flew back up into the bushes. Although this was only a brief encounter, we were happy that we'd got such lovely views of this beautiful orange and black finch. We now moved to the other side of the cafe, where there was more bird feeders, and we'd been told occasionally the very, very rare willow tit shows up here. So we sat and watched these feeders for a while. But as lively as these feeders were, the one species that didn't show up was willow tit. It was about this time some of the workers here fired up an extremely loud wood chipper. This was our cue to go and explore a little bit further down the path.
Hey folks, so we got the brambling briefly. We'd watch a bit more, but the chipping wood, which is horrendously loud in the background, so that scared all the birds off. So we're having a little walk before we go. So let's see if we can find any more birds for our year list.
We followed a path to the osprey viewing platform, where in the spring you can watch televisions with live feeds of the osprey nest. The reason we'd come here is because there was some more bird feeders. Just like by the cafe, there was loads of goldfinch and siskins, and a surprising number of coal tit. Whilst Kaylee was scanning the bird feeders, she spotted a different bird that wasn't a coal tit. It was our willow tit. This species is now rare and is the fastest declining resident bird species in the UK, with a frightening 85% drop in the population since 1995. And due to these birds disappearing fast, we struggled to get these on our year list last year, and only succeeded with help from another birder. The thing that made seeing them today, here, very special was how close to home it was. Excited, we stood and watched two of this species come back and two, eating the fat balls in one of the feeders.
Hey folks, so we've come to like the platformy bit where they look at ospreys in the spring when they're here. And we've just got a nice surprise in the shape of a willow tit.
Which is great.
Which we struggled with last year.
And we got it on our home too.
And we got it in Wales, which is super cool. That is an excellent bird for the day. Amazing.
Still bowled away by seeing the lovely willow tits, we headed back down the path towards the original bird feeders we started at, as I wanted to try and get more views of brambling. And luckily for us, by now the wood chipper had been turned off and parked up at the side of the road. We joined another birder by the bird feeders, And almost as soon as we arrived, we were treated to wonderful views of a tree creeper climbing up the tree the bird feeders are on. And our good fortune didn't end there. Our perseverance had paid off and we got lovely views of 2 more brambling. This species, although having a few past breeding successes in the UK, aren't a regular breeder in this country, but do turn up in winter in mixed finch flocks. And with its amazing black and orange plumage, is possibly my favourite British finch species. By now though, we had to move on as we had an important place to be. This meant a drive back towards the coast to somewhere I'd been previously in this video. Yes, Colwyn Bay. Both my incorrect ID on the Surf Scoter on one of our previous videos and my failure to find it since was really getting on my nerves. And me being so determined to find it was getting on Kaylee's nerves, but still, I had to give it one last go. And at least today the visibility was better, there wasn't a blanket of fog over the sea. And not only that, when we arrived there was other birders there, so hopefully more eyes on the sea, more chance to see the bird. Unfortunately though, when we spoke to one of the birders, he said he'd been there for 2 hours and not seen it. Regardless, we scanned the sea in front of us and there were plenty of birds there. As normal, hundreds and hundreds of common scoter, with some other species dotted amongst them like red-throated diver and cormorants too. After about half an hour of waiting, the birder next to me said, "I've got the surfy." And there it was, directly in front of us. Although distant, not massively distant, so this time there's no mistake with the ID. When seen properly and not just a speck in the far distance, this bird is unmistakable, with a huge black, white, yellow and orange bill and large patches of white plumage on the back of its neck and on its forehead. Not only that, it has a piercing white eye. And luckily for us today, with the sun out, all of these things made it stand out like a sore thumb amongst the common scouters. This species is from America, but do show up around the coasts of the UK in small numbers, generally in winter. And here in North Wales, we've had multiple individuals spend winters here over the last few years. This individual is believed to be one of at least 2 of this species present around this North Wales coast. But I didn't need 2. This one was plenty enough. Finally tracking down this bird that's given me no end of grief this year so far. Fantastic. Before we end the video, I've got a small announcement to make. During our previous video, one of our eagle-eyed viewers spotted a bird that we hadn't counted on our year list. That was a hooper swan. It was feeding behind some grey herons in some footage we took in sea houses. Thanks so much, we can add that now. We're driving home now after that successful little trip. So thanks so much for watching, please like,
Subscribe.
and please press the notification bell. We'll see you next time.